Welcome to this video tutorial with Virtual Racing School in the Porsche 911 GT3 Cup car on iRacing. This time we're at the legendary Francorchamps, which is one of my personal favourites with its super high speed and flowing nature, featuring the infamous Eau Rouge roller coaster. The lap I'll be looking at is driven by Rens Broekman in default afternoon weather, using race fuel to match the official series. I'll play the lap in full first, before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was a 2-minute 24.700. So from the list of data packs on the VRS website, we're going to choose the Porsche iRacing Cup data pack as driven by Rens Broekman, and week 8 is Francorchamps. And it loads up the session details where you can download the lap data, a replay, and the setup used. So we're just going to click on Learn Track, which will load up the driving analyzer. It will start to play the lap through. I've already slowed it down to half speed and muted it for this tutorial, but those of you might be unfamiliar with what we're seeing here. We're seeing a steering angle input trace across the duration of the lap, a speed trace, brake and throttle input traces, and some live driving inputs as well. So to start things off, we'll click on Sector 1, which is always the run from the start finish line to the braking zone for turn 1. So we'll just play this through, bring the car gradually over to the left hand side so that when you start braking you're near the edge of the circuit, and we've just passed the 150 meter marker there, and so in between the 150 and the 100 is going to be your braking point. I would say about 130 into La Source, turn 1. Braking quite hard into here, one of the hardest braking zones on the circuit, so about 72% there for Rens, or about 70% is threshold. Keep the car in a straight line, keep the car nice and wide, don't turn in too early, let the car bring the car down all the way into second gear, and then finally turn in and aim to use a decent amount of the apex curb. Now I'm just going to show you how much curb Rens uses there, because it is a lot, and he gets very close to the wall there. So you don't really need to be that close to the wall, but the closer the better. And then pick up the throttle very almost aggressively initially, so that you don't get initial understeer to unload the front tyres. And also notice that Rens at no point coasts into the apex, so hold those brakes all the way into the apex. Of course, bleed off them, but then yeah, pick up the throttle quite firmly for the best possible rotation on exit. Now you won't be able to commit to full throttle straight away. You're in second gear, so you're quite heavily traction limited, so you have to wait a little bit, wait for the car to straighten up, and then commit to full throttle, and use all of this curb on the exit, but avoid dropping a wheel beyond that, because it's quite slippery there. So I'm just going to speed this up as we travel now down the hill towards Eau Rouge at the bottom. Obviously you want to hug the pit wall on the right hand side as you approach. Just slow this down and play that through. Now there are a few different references you could use to turn in between the 100 and the 50. You've also got this set of lights, but that's pretty much going to be your turn-in points. And obviously when you do turn in, you're completely flat out, and your vision, you're aiming for the bottom of the hill, this curb at the bottom there. So that'll end sector 2. We'll go to sector 3. So at the bottom of the hill, you want to be teasing the brake and down into 5th gear and holding the brake as you start to turn right. So even though we're going up the hill now, continue holding the brake until you hook up with the curb in the middle of the corner, roughly at the steepest part of the corner, and that's where also you want to be committing hard on the throttle. So if you get it right, if you get your line right, then you'll end up popping out over the top of the hill, and you'll be able to straight line this curb over the top, and then keep the car nice and quiet and settled, still flat out of course, for this exit curb at the top there. So just going to speed it up again, obviously hug the right hand side there, and then under the bridge gradually bring the car back over to the left hand side of the circuit down Kemmel Straight, and then spotting your braking points for Le Cum. Go to sector 4 for that. It's going to be about 150 meters or so, or just after the 150 marker. So again, probably about 130, similar to turn 1. And braking quite hard. Oh, let's just slow that down. Again, refrain from turning in too soon. So we're halfway along the curb on the left here. So when he starts turning in, his left side wheels are in contact with the curb on the left. And then obviously down a gear, bleed off the brakes, but then hold those brakes on. Don't let go of them fully. You notice Rens is holding about 22% brake pressure there, all the way into the first apex. And this first apex curb, you can maybe use a little bit more curb. That's okay. And don't run too wide in the middle. So don't commit to too much throttle, because then you'll be too wide. And because you need to sort of compromise your line so that you get a nice wide entry into the next left-hander, where Rens is a lot more liberal with the curb this time. It's fully on there, and that helps the car rotate as well if you get up onto that curb there. Don't commit to too much throttle at this point. Because you're using so much curb, the car will rotate quite nicely anyway, so if you commit to too much throttle, you will induce oversteer. And then on the exit, bring the car over to the left-hand side. You don't need to be fully up against this curb on the left. Just get somewhere near it, and that will open up the next right-hander of turn 7, where it's not really a braking zone, but you can see that Rens is trail braking all the way into the apex, so about 5 or 10% just to keep the front end loaded up and help the car rotate on the entry. and also notice that he's picked up the throttle there significantly before the apex. So he knows that the car will still make it through the exit at this stage, and that's why he's able to commit to the throttle. But notice he's come off the brake and then sort of committed quite hard to the throttle. There's no sort of feathering in, so you need to keep that commitment to help the car rotate. And then of course hesitate slightly until the traction comes in. There is a little bit of oversteer that we can see in the steering trace that Rens has to make a correction to, which is just after he commits to full throttle. So that's okay if you can deal with it, and open the car up using all of the exit curb. Just be aware of the risk of getting an incident penalty from running too wide there. And then into Rivage now. We're going to be braking just around the 100 meter marker here. And Rivage is such a long radius corner that you almost need to treat it like a double apex. So braking hard initially, but turning in fairly soon, shortly after the curve on the left, and bleeding off those brakes down into third gear, holding those brakes on, and this is going to be the first apex. So we'll play it through. So the car will now move slightly away from the inside curb through this corner, and then in the middle is where you want to be picking up the throttle as the car is just about to retighten again. Pick up the throttle quite firmly, and then just after you've hit your second apex you should be able to commit to full throttle. Try not to be too wide as you exit Rivage, to allow yourself to open the next left-hander, no name corner, as much as possible. And you'll notice that when Rens starts braking, he's actually not near the edge of the circuit, but you look where he's aimed, he is aimed at the outside of the circuit. So even though he's braking and turning in at this phase, the car is still nearing the outside curb there. Third gear still at this point, holding those brakes all the way into the apex, and again picking up the throttle there just before the apex. And you need to be careful with this curb. Don't use the inside upper part of it, stay on the lower section, and try and avoid running too wide here on the exit as you commit to full throttle before the curb, because you will get penalised. So then keep the steering nice and quiet, keep the car over to the right hand side, down the hill into the tricky double apex left-hander of Pouhon. We'll go to sector 8 for this. So you want to be on the brakes into here just after the curb on the right hand side begins, and it's a relatively brief but firm braking zone, and then start turning in roughly 2/3 along the curb in fourth gear, hook up with that first apex nicely, still on the brakes, and then this is very much about timing and judgment. So your perfect line here is going to allow you to run out to that exit curb almost, or middle curb on the outside, but then the line will bring you back in to hit that second apex. But if you do it well, you should be able to pick up the throttle before the middle of the corner, which is what Rens has done here. But he's not quite able to commit to full throttle, so you do have to modulate at this stage. But the car's rotating really quite well, so you want to open the steering up depending on the balance of the car. If you get oversteer, you want to obviously open the wheel up. And then there's a slight bit of feathering from Rens as he modulates the throttle, presumably because he really wants to hit that second apex, which is then going to allow him to commit to full throttle and avoid running too wide on the exit. So up on the exit curb there, in towards the Fagner chicane now. Bring the car over to the left hand side, approaching the gantry here, braking significantly before there, keeping the car out left until you're well past the start of the curb on the left, down into third gear, and it's quite a long time that you need to keep the car nice and tight. and then pick up the throttle when you know that you're not going to run wide, because you need to keep the car nice and tight through the exit of the first part of the Fagner chicane. So you see again, he's abruptly hit the throttle, but he's not committed to full throttle because he wants to keep the car rotating and keep it tight. So he's almost still in contact with the curb on the right hand side by the time it finishes, which then sets him up really nicely for a nice wide approach into the left-hander, where the speed is such that you don't really need to slow the car down, just teasing the brakes here to help the car rotate, keep the car nice and tight, ensuring that he hits that apex, and if done correctly, he's able to pick up the throttle just before he apexes there. And again, these curbs can be quite aggressive. It is quite a high speed corner, so you want to stay on the lower section of them and have patience before committing to full throttle, because you can get some nasty oversteer if you are too eager. Allow the car out wide onto that exit curb, but try and avoid going out onto the painted green concrete there. And then immediately bring the car over to the left hand side to set yourself up for the braking zone into Stavelot. So we're not quite at the edge of the circuit by the time we start braking. A reference here for your braking point could be this access road on the right hand side when you're alongside there, and aiming for the outside curb there on the brakes. So again, opening the corner up as much as possible. Your exit here is quite important. Down into third gear, turning in quite late because you want to apex fairly late, so you get a good exit, holding those brakes all the way into the apex, and picking up the throttle pretty much on the apex this time. So don't be too early with it. You want the car to rotate, you want the car to be nice and tight on the exit, and you should be able to modulate to full throttle before you reach the exit curb, where you'll want the car nice and straight on that curb up into fourth gear. Turning in quite late again for the fast right-hander following. We'll go to sector 12. This is going to need a big lift. It's optional whether you need to brake for it. It depends on how well the car's rotating. But if you get your timing right, then you should be able to get back on the power really aggressively just before the apex, in this case for Rens. Slight bit of modulation as he's waiting for to fully commit, so that he's not going to run out of road on the exit and exceed the track limits here on the exit. So again, just bring the car over to the right hand side gradually. You want to try and straight line this section as much as possible, travel the shortest distance. The left-hander before Blanchimont is not quite fully straightforward. You do need to approach it from the right-hand edge of the circuit, otherwise it might cause you some problems. And then of course you exit it and start braking for Blanchimont just after that curb, or that green painted concrete on the right-hand side ends. That's going to be your braking point just after there. So we go to sector 13 for that. Obviously Blanchimont is a very high-speed corner, but you do need to brake for it in the Porsche, and turn in roughly halfway along the braking zone there, bleeding off the brakes, fifth gear, and again it's all about timing again. Rens has turned in just a fraction too late and is about half a car's width, maybe even less than that, away from the apex. So he's picked up the throttle quite aggressively just before the apex, which is kind of what you need to do, but then because he's missed it ever so slightly, he's had to feather out of the throttle to avoid running too wide on the exit. So recovered it well and hasn't lost very much time at all, and has the car positioned perfectly on the exit. No need to bring the car over to the left hand side too early for braking into the bus stop, and conveniently here there is a braking reference, this painted white line marking the final sector, and there's the 150 marker as well that you could use. So this is the hardest braking zone on the track. Notice that we're still not quite at the edge of the circuit, but our trajectory is taking us towards the entry curb on the left, so that when Rens does eventually turn in to the bus stop from second gear, he has just about made contact with it. So he's opened the corner up as much as possible, bleeding off the brakes, still holding on to those brakes to rotate the car, and then through the first half of this final chicane, keep the car nice and tight. You can get back into the throttle, but the important thing is that you keep the car rotating, and that will give you a nice wide entry or neutral entry for the second half of the chicane, where hopefully you should be able to pick up the throttle at the apex. Now you do need a decent amount of patience here to modulate the throttle. The car goes a little bit light over the top, so you need to straighten the car up, and then you should be able to commit to full throttle. And even then there's a small correction for oversteer for Rens there, as that completes a lap. You can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book one-on-one tuition with top drivers from the likes of Quentin and Good luck for this week, and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.